A single piece of fabric hidden beneath the floor of a tent. A forbidden object buried away from everyone's eyes. A choice made in the shadows that unleashed a wave of death, despair, and defeat for an entire nation. How many times has a seemingly small decision, made in secret, ended up affecting not just the fate of the one who made it, but everyone around them? The story we'll explore today reveals one of the most intriguing and disturbing episodes of Israel's conquest of the Promised Land. A man named Achan, driven by greed at the sight of gleaming gold and the beauty of a simple Babylonian robe, ignored an explicit divine command. His secret act would end up costing the lives of 36 Israelite warriors who marched confidently into a battle that should have been a guaranteed victory. What happens when a single act of disobedience contaminates an entire community? How can an object hidden underground bring to light profound questions about collective responsibility, individual sin, and consequences that transcend the person who committed the error? This is a narrative about temptation, choice, and devastating consequences. It's a story that is rarely told in detail, often summarized in a few lines or mentioned only as an example of punishment. But between the lines of this account, we find surprising revelations about human nature that continue to echo through the centuries. What would lead a man to risk everything for material objects, knowing the potential consequences? And why did others, completely innocent, pay with their lives for a mistake they didn't even know had been committed? This story brings a perspective on temptation and justice that few know, and that might completely change how we understand the consequences of our secret choices. The people of Israel had just witnessed one of the greatest miracles of their journey. After 40 years wandering in the wilderness, they finally crossed the Jordan River toward the Promised Land. The waters parted, just as had happened decades earlier at the Red Sea. The first obstacle in their path was the city of Jericho, an imposing fortress, protected by walls so thick that small houses were built within them. Jericho wasn't just a city, it was a symbol, the first major test for the people now led by Joshua, the chosen successor to continue the work that Moses had begun. The setting was ancient Canaan, a fertile region situated between the desert and the Mediterranean Sea, around 1400 BC. A land described as flowing with milk and honey, with verdant hills, productive valleys, and fortified cities. In this era, the Middle East was a patchwork of small kingdoms and city-states. Each important city had its own king and army. Each was like a small independent nation. Jericho was one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, existing for thousands of years before the Israelites arrived. The political tension was palpable. The Canaanites had heard stories about this nomadic people who had escaped from Egypt, the greatest power of the time. Rumors circulated about how their God had opened the sea for them, how they had defeated powerful kings in the desert. Fear had spread throughout Canaan. To fully understand Achan's error, we need to comprehend the spiritual context. Before the Battle of Jericho, Joshua had received very specific divine instructions. The city would be completely devoted to destruction. In practical terms, this meant that all valuable objects, gold, silver, bronze, and iron, were to be dedicated to the Lord's treasury. Nothing was to be taken as personal plunder. This practice, known as herem in Hebrew, was a form of total consecration. In some battles, the Israelites could keep the spoils. In others, especially the first conquests in Canaan, everything was to be dedicated to God or destroyed. The idea was clear: the conquest was not for personal enrichment, but to fulfill a divine purpose. Achan was a man from the tribe of Judah, one of the most prominent among the 12 tribes of Israel. His grandfather, Zerah, was a well-known name. He wasn't an outcast or someone of little importance. He was part of a respected lineage, a warrior among warriors, marching alongside his brothers to conquer the Promised Land after generations of waiting. The conflict Achan would face wouldn't be with an external enemy, but an internal one, a silent battle between duty and desire, obedience and temptation, a struggle that occurred as the walls of Jericho collapsed around him, revealing the treasures of one of the oldest and richest cities in the region. The great question forming wasn't whether Israel would conquer the land, but whether they would maintain faithfulness to the purpose for which they were brought there. The trumpets sounded for 7 consecutive days as the Israelites marched around the walls of Jericho. In an almost surreal moment, when the last sound of the trumpets echoed and the people shouted, the imposing walls of the city simply collapsed. The warriors invaded from all sides, strictly following the divine orders transmitted by Joshua. In the midst of this chaos of dust, shouts and destruction, Achan moved through the ruins of the city like any other soldier. The scene around him was one of total destruction, houses being burned, the population being eliminated according to the command received. While his compatriots concentrated on fulfilling their military tasks, something completely captured Achan's attention. There, among the rubble of a house that probably belonged to a wealthy merchant, Achan saw something that shone intensely. He approached cautiously, looking to the sides to make sure nobody was watching him. It was a beautiful Babylonian robe, an extremely valuable piece of clothing. Babylonian robes were famous throughout the ancient world for their luxurious fabrics and elaborate dyes that used techniques known only to the artisans of that region. Beside the robe, he found 200 shekels of silver, approximately 5 pounds, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels, about 1.25 pounds. To get an idea of the value, an ordinary worker of the time would need to work for years to accumulate such wealth. Achan looked around again. His companions were busy with their own tasks. No one was paying attention to him in that moment of chaos. An inner voice certainly reminded him of Joshua's clear orders. Everything was to be destroyed or consecrated to the Lord's treasury. Nothing was to be taken for personal use. But another voice, more seductive, whispered, "Who will know? It's just a robe, some coins, and a small bar of gold. Among all the treasures of Jericho, who will miss these few items?" The internal conflict lasted only a few seconds. With quick movements, Achan hid the treasures among his garments. That night, while the Israelite camp celebrated the great victory, Achan couldn't feel the same joy. He carried not just the hidden treasures, but also the weight of disobedience. Upon returning to his tent, away from curious eyes, he dug a hole in the ground and buried the stolen objects. The Babylonian robe, with its intricate patterns and vibrant colors, disappeared under the earth, as did the silver and gold. On top, Achan scattered sand and positioned some of his belongings, perfectly disguising the location of the hiding place. Perhaps he managed to sleep that night, convincing himself that his act would have no consequences. After all, who could discover it? Among thousands of Israelites, how would anyone know what he had done amid the chaos of battle? Dawn brought new orders from Joshua. Still riding the wave of the impressive victory at Jericho, the Israelites prepared to conquer the next target, the small city of Ai. The spies sent to scout the terrain returned confident. "We don't need to send the entire army. 2,000 or 3,000 men will be enough to defeat Ai. It's a small city. Don't tire all the people by sending them there." Joshua, following this advice, sent about 3,000 warriors to conquer Ai. The contrast with the previous battle couldn't be greater. Instead of walls miraculously falling, the warriors of Israel encountered fierce and unexpected resistance. The inhabitants of Ai not only resisted the attack, but counterattacked with surprising vigor. What should have been an easy victory transformed into a humiliating retreat. 36 Israelite soldiers lost their lives that day. Men with families, with stories, with futures ahead of them. Men who had survived the desert crossing and the Battle of Jericho, only to die in a small city that, according to all expectations, shouldn't have presented any real threat. News of the defeat spread quickly through the Israelite camp. The shock was immense. How could they have lost to such a small city after defeating mighty Jericho? Panic began to set in. If they couldn't defeat Ai, how would they conquer the rest of the land? Residents of other cities, upon hearing about this defeat, would certainly gain courage to resist. Joshua tore his clothes in a sign of mourning and prostrated himself before the Ark of the Covenant until evening, along with the elders of Israel. His anguished prayer echoed the feeling of all the people. "Why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us. While mourning for the 36 dead spread through the camp, Achan remained silent. Had he made the connection between his secret act and the unexpected defeat? The scriptures don't tell us. We only know that he didn't come forward voluntarily, even as families mourned for fathers, sons and brothers who would never return. The divine response to Joshua was direct and disturbing. Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions. The problem wasn't just the theft itself, but the direct violation of a specific command. The explanation continued. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore, unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. The order was clear. The guilty one needed to be found and punished. The next morning, Joshua rose early and began a systematic process of identification. First the tribe, then the clan, then the family, and finally the individual. As if an invisible hand guided the process, all the selections pointed inexorably toward Achan. When he finally stood before Joshua, surrounded by all Israel, there was no more hiding. Denial would be useless in the face of what appeared to be a divine revelation. Joshua looked at him and simply said, "My son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and honor him. Tell me what you have done. Do not hide it from me." At that moment, with thousands of eyes fixed on him, Achan finally confessed. His response was surprisingly direct. "It is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonian, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent, with the silver underneath." To confirm the confession, messengers were sent to Achan's tent. They ran there and found exactly what he had described, buried exactly where he had indicated. The objects were brought before Joshua and all the people, exposed as evidence of the crime that had cost so many innocent lives. The beauty of the Babylonian robe, which had so attracted Achan, was now exposed to the sun, its elaborate patterns visible to all. The shine of the silver and gold, which he had planned to use secretly to enrich himself, now condemned him publicly. The treasures he couldn't enjoy for even a single day became the instruments of his downfall. What happened next reveals one of the most severe and controversial aspects of justice in ancient Israel. Joshua, along with all the people, led Achan to the valley of Achor. The name of this valley becomes significant. Achor means trouble or disaster in Hebrew, a name that would forever carry the memory of this tragic event. But here arises one of the most disturbing elements of this story. Not only was Achan taken to the valley, with him went his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys and sheep, his tent and all his possessions, including the stolen items. The biblical text doesn't make clear if his wife was also present, but the implication is that his entire family accompanied him. Joshua then pronounced the words that sealed Achan's fate. "Why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today." All Israel stoned Achan and his family members to death, and afterward burned their bodies along with all their possessions. Finally, they piled over them a heap of stones which, according to the biblical account, remained there for a long time, a somber monument, reminding of the consequences of a single act of disobedience. This collective punishment raises profound questions that are rarely discussed when this story is told. Did his sons and daughters know about the theft? Were they accomplices or innocent victims? Why were they punished for their father's crime? The biblical text doesn't provide direct answers to these questions, leaving a disturbing silence that echoes through the centuries. What we know for certain is that after this collective execution, the divine wrath subsided. When the Israelites attacked Achor for the second time, they were completely victorious, without losing a single man. The city was conquered using a military strategy of ambush, without the miraculous elements that characterized the fall of Jericho. but still a decisive victory. This rapid change in military fortune suggests a direct connection between the purification of Achan's sin and the re-establishment of divine favor. The implicit message is clear: the disobedience of a single individual can affect an entire community, and restoration only occurs after the complete removal of the transgression. An important revelation emerges when we analyze the original text more deeply. The Hebrew term used to describe what Achan felt when seeing the treasures is chamad, the same word used in the 10th commandment against coveting. It wasn't a simple momentary desire, but a deep covetousness that consumed him to the point of making him ignore the potential consequences. This linguistic detail reveals something fundamental about the nature of temptation. It rarely begins with action, but with looking and desiring. Achan's own words confirm this progression: I saw, I coveted, I took, I hid, a sequence that echoes through countless stories of moral failure in all cultures and ages. Another element frequently neglected in this narrative is the Babylonian robe itself. Why, among all possible treasures in Jericho, does the text give so much emphasis to this piece of clothing? Babylonian robes were known for their extraordinary beauty, but also for their association with status and wealth. They were symbols of luxury and power, frequently worn by royalty and nobility. More significantly, these items often had religious motifs and symbols of pagan deities woven into their elaborate patterns. By taking this specific robe, Achan wasn't just disobeying a military order, but potentially introducing an object of idolatry into the camp of Israel, exactly the type of influence that the rigorous laws about devoted things aimed to avoid. This deeper layer of the story is rarely explored, but offers an important perspective on why the punishment was so severe. It wasn't just a matter of theft, but of potential spiritual contamination of the people themselves. Achan's story also reveals something about the nature of sin that transcends its specific historical context. The idea that no one would see or know what he did, what modern psychologists would call the illusion of anonymity, is a deception that continues to influence human behavior thousands of years later. We, like Achan, frequently underestimate how our secret actions can have public consequences far beyond what we imagine. 36 men died, families were shattered, and a nation's confidence was shaken, all because of objects hidden beneath a tent, which their possessor never got to enjoy. The heap of stones in the valley of Achor remained as a somber memorial for generations, reminding travelers who passed by of the terrible story that had occurred in that place. It's interesting to note that, centuries later, the prophet Hosea would mention the valley of Achor not as a place of judgment, but as a door of hope, suggesting that even the places of our greatest failures can become points of new beginning. To discover more fascinating stories like this, simply subscribe to the channel. There are countless narratives in the Holy Scriptures that, like this one, reveal deep layers of meaning when examined with attention to details often overlooked. Achan's story, despite having occurred more than 3,000 years ago, continues to challenge us with questions deeply relevant to our days. In a world where surveillance cameras are everywhere, but we still believe certain behaviors will forever remain hidden, Achan's fate reminds us that the illusion of secrecy is exactly that, an illusion. How many times in modern history have we seen leaders, celebrities, and ordinary people whose private choices, once revealed, destroyed not only their own lives, but caused collateral damage to countless innocents around them? The dynamic remains sadly similar: a momentary temptation, an impulsive decision, the illusion that no one will ever discover it, and then devastating consequences that extend far beyond the individual. The question of collective justice versus individual responsibility that this story raises continues to be debated in our modern legal systems. To what extent are we responsible for the actions of our close relatives? How much of an individual's behavior reflects the values transmitted by their family? These questions echo through the ages, from the Valley of Achor to contemporary courtrooms. The 36 soldiers who died at Ai never knew why they were defeated.
They died without understanding that their defeat was linked to the actions of a man they possibly didn't even know. This reality overlaps in a disturbing way with our own era, where we frequently suffer the consequences of choices made by people we'll never know, in meeting rooms we'll never have access to. The contrast between Jericho and Ai also offers a powerful reflection. The first, a formidable city with imposing walls, fell miraculously without effective resistance. The second, small and apparently insignificant, caused a humiliating defeat. How many times in our lives are the giants we fear less dangerous than the small temptations we underestimate? Perhaps the most enduring lesson from Achan's story is the power of a single yes or no in critical moments of decision. When Achan saw the Babylonian robe and the treasures gleaming among the rubble, he had only a few seconds to decide. That brief moment altered not just the course of his life, but that of an entire nation. Similarly, our lives are frequently defined not by the great plans we make, but by the small choices we take when no one is looking. Integrity, after all, is not what we do when everyone is watching, but who we are in moments of absolute privacy. The Babylonian robe that so fascinated Achan ended up being his shroud. The treasures he never got to enjoy became the evidence of his condemnation. His last views on earth were of his family and possessions being destroyed because of his choice, an infinitely high price for a moment of weakness. And perhaps this is the final reflection that this ancient story offers us. The true value of things is rarely what it seems at the moment of temptation. The robe that seemed priceless in Achan's eyes would be worth nothing compared to the lives of the 36 men who died indirectly because of it, or compared to the pain of families who lost fathers, sons and brothers, or even compared to his own life and that of his family members. In the end, Achan's story calls us to consider not just the immediate price of our choices, but also their potential long-term cost, not just for ourselves, but for all those whose lives are intertwined with ours. In an increasingly interconnected world, this ancient lesson from the Valley of Achor echoes with surprising relevance. No decision is truly private. No choice affects only the individual who makes it. Under the fallen walls of our own Jerichos, when we encounter our Babylonian robes, whatever forms they take in our days, Achan's story remains as a beacon through the millennia, reminding us of the eternal vigilance needed in seemingly small moments that can define not just individual destinies, but collective ones.